to the Rob Burgess Show. I'm, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 152nd episode, our guest is Matt Bors. Matt Bors is a nationally syndicated editorial cartoonist and editor based in Portland, Oregon. He is the founder of the comics site The Nib and previously worked at Medium. Bors was a 2012 Pulitzer Prize finalist for his political cartoons, which appear regularly in The Nation, Portland Mercury, and on Daily Kos and Foreign Policy. His work has been published by CNN, The Guardian, The Intercept, Upworthy, Village Voice, and dozens of other print and web publications. He also edited comics for NSFW Corp magazine and Cartoon Movement. In 2012, Bors was the recipient of the Herblock Prize and the Society of Professional Journalists Sigma Delta Chi Award for his editorial cartooning. His first graphic novel, War is Boring, a collaboration with journalist David Axe, was published in 2010 by New American Library. And now on to the show.
Yeah, so I am Matt Bors, and political cartoonist and editor of The Nib, which is a website for political cartoons and comics journalism.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to talk to you. You're one of my favorite editorial cartoonists. You and Tom Tomorrow have always been kind of 1 and 2, so I'm really excited to talk to you. But who were your favorite cartoonists growing up, either editorial or otherwise?
Well, I wasn't actually into any editorial cartooning for the longest time until I decided to do it. I've always been into comics, though, so, you know, when I was young, I was really into superhero stuff, and particularly Image. Like, you know, I'm 36 now, so I'm like the perfect age for being a young boy who was into the Image comics revolution. I was probably 10 or 11 when Spawn came out and Wildcats and all that stuff. So I mean, all those guys were like my original inspiration for wanting to do comics at all. And then as I got a little older, I started getting into more indie comics and underground comics. Dan Clowes was definitely a big inspiration for me. And then I actually did the part of comics that I really didn't follow very closely at all is strips and editorial cartooning, until I wanted to do editorial cartooning in the run-up to the Iraq War. And then I kind of discovered this world of, you mentioned Tom Tomorrow. He was a big influence, as well as Ruben Balling and all those guys in that sort of milieu, Durf. And then at the time, David Reese started Get Your War On, which was a great strip, although it wasn't drawn, but it was hilarious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Did you have any aspirations before that to do kind of more what you were talking about, what you read when you were a kid type thing? Had you started any projects like that, or did you just, when you started thinking about doing it seriously, you just went straight into the editorial cartooning?
Yeah, nothing major, because I started doing editorial cartoons when I was 19, and then so I didn't have a lot of time to do any kind of serious work in that, other than just like comics growing up as a kid and everything. But I've always had ideas about doing stuff like that, and still do, really. I mean, if I had more time, what I would really want to focus on more is longer nonfiction cartooning, which I do a little bit of for the Nib when I have time. But I mean, I still have interest in doing fictional comics and even superhero comics. I mean, I love all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do see that influence in your style there, and especially when you do the flash forward pieces to the you have some kind of world that you imagine, I guess, for the future that you place certain things in, and it seems like it kind of has a narrative flow to it. So
yeah, well, that's funny. I mean, I love doing that stuff. So what happened is, I never made any characters for my comics, and most political cartoonists don't at all, except Tom Tomorrow has a very, succeeded in doing that. But I never did, in retrospect, maybe it would have been better to. Readers love that stuff, but it just never seemed like something that fit with political cartooning. And in the last few years, I mean, things have been so hard kind of to come up with new ideas each week, or at least ones that feel interesting to me or that say anything new, because, you're dealing with the same kind of issues nonstop with Trump and the alt-right, and, it just feels like we're just stuck in this endless situation. So I started doing these comics that take place in a dystopian future because it's hard to exaggerate anything that's happening now, and the mood is sort of that we are presently in and moving into a sort of tech-fueled climate dystopia where with the rise of nationalism around the world. So it's fun to draw crumbling landscapes and post-apocalyptic characters and people with cybernetic limbs and stuff, and I just started jumping ahead to the future where Trump is sort of an Immortan Trump from Mad Max type guy, called Overlord Trump. And I mean, it actually started, me and Matt Lubchansky, who draws for the Nib and works with and stuff. We are pretty close and talk about ideas constantly and riff off each other. And we both started doing this where I came up with sort of what ended up being called the Trump Guard, which is Judge Dredd style, like enforcers who have Trump hair helmets. And we both sort of build on this idea of this future timeline, and especially when we were doing Nib animation at First Look, we did some segments together that we wrote that really kind of felt like it made it a cohesive world. But I realized that, one, I mean, I'm really just people seem to like it, but I'm really trying to keep myself interested in, like, doing this after 15 years. And I mean, I not that I don't love doing it, but it gets pretty exhausting kind of paying attention to the news nonstop every week for a decade and a half and trying to come up with new things to say. So this kind of keeps me really interested. It's fun to draw, and I realize it's just a lot of my influences coming back to me, from like X-Men, Judge Dredd, Terminator, Mad Max. Just, I mean, I guess at heart I'm really into like dystopian sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, definitely. But I was thinking about it, and I think the first cartoon of yours that I really remember seeing was one from 2011, which was the Steve Jobs' new job one. Yeah, was that kind of a breakthrough moment for you? Because that was the first time you kind of appeared on my radar, and I was like, oh, that is so good.
Yeah, that was and remains one of the most popular cartoons I've ever done. Definitely at the time it became that, because it's easy to forget a world without social media. But 2011 was, still, it wasn't early in social media, but I mean, it was still almost a different world from the one that we live in now. Like, I remember that blew up, I think, because of Reddit. And I don't know what it translated to, page view wise or something, but I mean, I think it was seen by millions of people that week, and it was just like, I had people I hadn't talked to in like 10 years messaging me and being like, oh, I saw this cartoon, and I did interviews about it and stuff, and it just it just took off, because it was for anyone listening that doesn't know, one of my gripes with editorial cartooning is the Obit cartoon, which the person at the pearly gates saying a line from something, that their catchphrase or something. And I mean, at this point it's cliche because people have made fun of that stuff for a while, but when I was younger, I used to just get so mad at all the professionals that would just phone in these comics every celebrity death, and I would just I mean, I remember I had like some fights with people and stuff because we all used to be on like message boards, and I would just rip on these guys so much. And then, by 2011, it seemed like everybody understood that it was cliched, and yet when Steve Jobs died, I mean, everyone is like drawing him at the pearly gates, and St. Peter's swiping him in with the, iPad and saying, "Oh, I love your work," or whatever, and God wants to text with you or whatever it was like. And then I remember one of the things was that he's a Buddhist, and they do this with anyone regardless of their religion. It's like they just do this automatically. And so I drew him coming up there, and St. Peter says something funny and swipes him, and Steve Jobs is like, I'm a Buddhist. I don't even believe in heaven, and then he says, "Oh, well, you're a Buddhist. We can reincarnate you," and he reincarnates him into a line worker at, which at the time, was like really under scrutiny for people like jumping off the building and killing themselves and stuff. So. And I mean, that kind of, besides being popular, I think was successful in like my theory of editorial cartooning and why I'm so mad about obit cartoons is that, they're just like fluff and they don't critique the person or they're not saying anything of use. It's just, hey, like a famous person died that you know of, and like here's St. Peter saying, saying whatever, like their catchphrase.
Right. Yeah.
And then,
Well. Yeah.
and then you just look at it, and then you nod, and you say, "Oh, I know that person. I remember that catchphrase." And then that's it. And it's just like a purposeless cartoon, a complete waste of space.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, part of my job as a newspaper editor is I have to pick the editorial cartoons for the opinion page, and you're right. Just every time I have a syndicate that I pick from, and anytime a famous person dies, I know that like half of them, it's going to be impossible for me to like pick a new cartoon for the next day because they're all going to be the same St. Peter pearly gates famous person catchphrase thing. And it's like, come on, is this really? I know it's hard, but good, like, do you see each other's work at least? Like,
Yeah.
come on.
I don't know if I should go back to it because I need to wait for someone to die that's famous, I guess. But I did a couple other ones, like kind of riffing off that years later. Like I did when what's his name, Fred Phelps, that anti-gay lunatic preacher died. I did one with him, and then the Kalashnikov, the guy who made the AK-47. I was like, oh, I'll just make a cartoon about this and God talking about, the AK-47. So I it's been years since I did anything like that though. But maybe next time someone prominent dies, I'll do one. I know I would do if like someone really prominent died. I mean, Dick Cheney. I know what I'm gonna draw. I mean, you can. I want to do like disrespectful obits for Bush and Cheney and I don't know who else, but I feel like I know what I would draw in the case of those people dying, but like an actual celebrity, it's just like pointless to me.
Yeah, absolutely. But another one of the first ones that kind of caught my attention of yours was when you drew Martin Shkreli, who's actually been a guest of the Rob Burgess Show before he was a guest of the state of New York. You drew him, and then he offered to buy it, and then he bumped the price up to $750. Did he ever pay you for that, by the way?
Well, here's what happened. It's an interesting story. I'm gonna forget some details, but basically, I made a cartoon about him jacking up the pill price to $750. And then I must have been trying to get attention and tweeting it at him or something, and he got mad, and I said something like, I usually sell my original. Maybe it was I usually sell my originals for $120, but for you it's $10,000 or something. It was like based on the percentage that he upped the pill price. And then this random account said, I'll buy it for $10,000 if you donate $1,000 to a charity of my choice or something like that. And this is like a completely random account. I said, sure, PayPal me $10,000 at my email address. And then like 10 minutes later, $10,000 arrived in my PayPal account.
Whoa.
And then so I was tweeting about this. And so this guy wanted to remain anonymous, so I didn't publish his name right away, or I don't think I ever published his name, but I did. This is what happened: is I said, so I. Oh no! Here's what it was. Now it's coming back to me. It was something to the effect of buying the comic for $1,000 and donating $9,000 to a charity of his choice. Because what happened was I said, I don't want to deal with this on my taxes of having to deduct $9,000 for charitable donation. I mean, I know that it's a write-off, but it's like that represents like a significant portion of my income. I just didn't want to deal with it. So I said, I'll keep the 1,000, I'll return 9,000, and then you donate it to whatever charity. I don't even know if he said what it was going to be. And so we agreed to that, but then he disappeared. So I did ultimately make $1,000, and I sold the original and I mailed it to him.
Oh wow! Okay.
And then so I did some sleuthing based on his name, and he's like a Wall Street guy and had to have been a friend of Skrelly's or something like that. Because
right.
It didn't make any sense otherwise. Like I think that he these are guys who just have millions of dollars and don't really care, and like his friend buying this as a joke for him or something like that, it seemed like it made the most sense. So I was thinking that, when the state of New York like confiscated all his assets, including the Wu-Tang album that he owns,
right.
that they may hold the original art. I don't know.
Man. Yeah, it might have been one of those guys on that video where he was threatening Ghostface Killah, or I guess on his webcam or whatever. So,
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. Now that we're talking about that, it's like I can't believe that the government hasn't released the Wu-Tang album.
I know. Well, he played a little bit of it before he went to jail, right? I mean, it was kind of like just over the whatever live streaming thing he was doing, but yeah, it never came out, did it? That whole album. Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you now, you mentioned the nib and what's going on with it. Just going back to the start of the nib, how did the nib start? Because it seemed like it was going pretty well for a long time, and I know there's been a lot of changes recently, but
yeah, well, it's kind of always been in flux, or there's been a couple different big moments in its life that has had near-death experiences for the website. But it started in 2013. I launched it as a Medium publication with funding from Medium. So they were pumping a lot of money into publications at the time to try to get, build up publications on their website. And I just wrote an editor there, and I just said, hey man, I know that you're looking for readers, and what you're paying and what kind of readership numbers you're looking for, and I said I can do that with comics easy. And they gave me some money to test it out essentially, and it was hugely successful. I mean, definitely at one point the most trafficked Medium publication, and then it was successful enough that I ultimately got on staff at Medium, which no other outside publication had done. So it seemed really good until it wasn't, which is, with these tech companies, they pivot on a dime almost. I mean, there was all these in-house publications like Matter and QPoint was like a music publication, and the Nib, and we were all funded directly from Medium, and most of the staff was Medium staff, and then there was a bunch of other like third-party publications that Medium was also funding, and they just had millions basically pumping into publications. And it wasn't, I mean, they weren't making money, but also like Medium had no means to make money at that time, so we were like I was always interested in starting some kind of subscription model or membership or Patreon or whatever way for readers to support the publication, because I always thought that was going to be the most realistic way to create something sustainable. And sort of overnight, they just decided that they weren't into the in-house publications anymore, and they just completely got rid of them all. I mean, and then since then, they've done like 3 or 4 more major pivots, and they brought in big publishers again, and then now they have sort of a subscription model, and they have all these in-house publications again. I mean, I don't know what they're doing. I haven't talked to anybody there in a while, but that's what happened with Medium.
Right. Now, sorry, is that the same as First Look Media, or is that
No,
different?
that was the second company.
Right.
Line.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
the Nib started in 2013, and then they pulled the plug on us in 2015, and then I sort of immediately hooked up with First Look Media, which runs the Intercept, and some other publications, but at the time it was mostly just the Intercept, and pitched them on, just funding the Nib. I mean, a similar thing, and they went for it, and it was we relaunched in 2016, and then everything was good there for a couple years, and we did this animated series, which was really fun to do, and launched our magazine ultimately, which is great, and then then kind of a similar thing where kind of out of the blue, just change of plans, and they laid us off.
And now you're fully independent, and people can support you, right, in a membership type model?
Yeah, so through both of these situations, I maintained ownership of the Nib, and really, with this time, I'm fortunate, really, because there was a business plan in place for the Nib. We had launched a magazine and a membership program, and we have thousands of people who give us between $2 and $40 a month, and so there's the Nib is diminished now. We don't publish as much as we did at all. We publish probably half the amount of comics, but we were publishing a ton of comics, like 20 a week for years, and spending a lot of money on it. So we can't quite maintain that, but there is a print magazine, there's daily comics, and it's 100% supported by readers now.
Mm-hmm. I know from, I was the last editor of Nouveau Newsweekly in Indianapolis before it pulled a print publication, and then now turned into a online membership thing. And so I do know firsthand how hard it is can do that kind of transition. How have the people who support the Nib stepped up, knowing that they didn't have to pay for anything before? Obviously, they don't have to pay for it now, but you're kind of asking people to find the value in it, and kind of support it, what they want to continue existing.
Yeah, well, when this thing first happened with First Look Media, I was not sure what the future was going to look like, and once it went public that they weren't going to fund us anymore, we did sort of a campaign around it, and like that we were going independent, we were still going to exist, and we tripled our membership numbers in like 2 months, and
Wow.
that amount of revenue has really made the difference between, I didn't know if we were going to be able to still publish the magazine, or if we were even going to be able to publish daily, and now we can. I think from the outside it probably looks somewhat similar because we're publishing every day, but on the inside it's different, because we all got laid off. There was 4 full-time staffers, and there's simply not enough revenue for me to hire other people right now, so I'm the only person working on it full-time. I have my whole former staff is involved. I mean, they're basically working here and there as freelancers, so it sucks. Like, this was their full-time job, some of them for 5 years. So it's been a big transition, and I'm hoping that I can grow this enough so that I can hire back some people eventually, because I definitely could use the help. But we're now in the third I guess, the third major era of the Nib, and this is going to be what it is. I'm kind of willing to forgo some of the funding of new media to not have to deal with these like lurching strategic things. I mean, it's just so stressful and disruptive, and I've essentially had to lay off my staff twice now. I mean, I didn't like it wasn't me who did it, but it sucks that happened.
Yeah.
And me as well. I mean, uh, I've been trying to figure out my health insurance even is just a logistical nightmare. I mean, it's just really hard to lose your job in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the point is that I the nib is a little bit smaller, but I like being independent, being entirely reader funded. That may mean that it's smaller in the long term. It may even mean that we go nonprofit at some point or find other sources of funding. I mean, I'm not against even some sort of partnership with another big publisher in a sense, but I just am very wary of the sort of stuff I've had to deal with before.
Mm-hmm. So you have a new book coming out, right?
Yeah, so I got a book coming out in March 2020, which is my first collection of cartoons in a long time, like since before I started the Nib, because I haven't had any time to do a book. So I basically had a collection of my cartoons from the Obama era, and this is, going to be a collection of cartoons from the Trump era, which I'm glad to have in print because I wasn't really considering that I'd have the time to do a book before the Trump administration is hopefully over in 2020. And when the stuff happened with Medium or First Look, actually it was a little bit before they got in touch about doing a book. And when the stuff with First Look happened, I said, yeah, let's do it for sure. So it's a comic publisher called Clover Press, which is a new publisher. It's some of the guys from IDW like branched off to do their own thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called We Should Improve Society, somewhat based off of this. Well, I'd call it a comic, but now people call it a meme because it got really popular.
I really like that one, Mr. Gotcha guy. That's his name, right?
Yeah, it's just it started as just this one comic I did, and I mean at this point I forget when the original publication date on it is, probably 2014 or something,
Mm-hmm.
and it just started becoming more and more popular. And then by like 2016 or when Trump got in, it was being used a lot. And I was like, oh wow, this is pretty popular. It's maybe like meme status now. And then it just like people kept using it, and it's like nonstop. And I mean, it feels like it may not even have peaked yet. Like people just still use this thing so much. It's almost annoying because I log into Twitter every day and people are like tagging me and like using it to respond to somebody's tweet and everything. I mean, it's just like people use it constantly. So I figured I would that comic now is probably more popular than my own name or anything like that. So I figured it would be smart to capitalize on the meme status of it and use it as the title of my book. Oh, it also kind of is like a perfect encapsulation of just my politics in a way. I mean, I'd consider myself on the left, so I want more than just to like somewhat improve society, but it's like can we just settle for just something just a little bit better?
Right. And the for people that don't know who Mr. Gotcha guy is, basically he's a living embodiment of a logical fallacy in which you attack your opponent not based on their argument, but that they're like not living their argument fully, or like they're arguing for people to like do better in society, but you participate in society. It's like it's
Yeah.
like it seems like it has a kind of evergreen flavor to it because it's like the first thing to go to when you don't have like a good argument against something. It's like, oh, but I see you doing this.
Yeah, and then it got popular enough. I didn't make that guy like a recurring character or anything for years,
Uh-huh.
and I decided to do a sequel because the one of the reasons people use it so much as like a response panel is because so many conservatives especially use this logic constantly, and it's like, oh, I mean, they're doing it with Greta Thunberg, and they do it with everything. AOC gets it a lot. She got she got a haircut. It cost $60, and it's like, I don't know, a woman's haircut in color costing like $60 is not as like a normal price, and like New York City. I mean, it's like they're just so obsessed with, Greta Thunberg's riding a train, which is part of her whole thing. I mean, she's like against air travel, and then they're like, oh, but you're using a train which consumes energy, and it's like, well, she's not saying don't exist and exhale carbon ever, or eat any food or use any product from that's manufactured ever. But so I brought the guy back for a couple comics, and I even, to incorporate the dystopian comics, I had him in the far future encountering like an old Greta Thunberg who has like a cybernetic arm and is like has like a gun or something.
But yeah, I really like that because it encapsulates so much in such a small space. But another style of editorial cartooning does that, but in kind of a completely bonkers way, is conservative editorial cartoonists. And I'm kind of thinking of Ben Garrison here. He fits so much craziness into such a small such a small space, and it's like, I want to be mad at this, but I'm kind of just in awe of it. Like,
yeah, no, he's incredible. And actually, what is interesting about his story is that he's always been kind of a weirdo libertarian cartoonist, and one of these guys who is just in this kind of C-list tier of editorial cartoonists, where they're like an adult man who isn't actually published anywhere, but is like devoted to producing editorial cartoons all the time for some reason. And so he used to just be like nobody, and then like 4chan, I mean, I think it was 4chan, but it was like basically internet trolls started making his comics like anti-Semitic. And he got furious, and he threatened to sue people. And we actually did a piece at the Nib years ago about this, because like before he became Ben Garrison as he's known now. And he so it was kind of like the people who are into like Pepe memes and shit would do this, but this was before Pepe. And then when Trump happened, he just became this alt-right, Pepe loving, and like conspiracy monger, and really just pandering to this crowd so intensely, doing comics about Hillary and Pizzagate. I mean, just like over the top stuff. It's just like hilarious to read because it's so patently ridiculous. And he draws in like it's like a fake old school editorial cartoon with all these labels, and except the labels are like Pizzagate, like occultism, and like all this weird. And then I was rereading Watchmen because everybody's talking about Watchmen now, and in the back matter there is this Dave Gibbons did a fake right-wing editorial cartoon that's like in the New Frontiersman, which is a right-wing paper that Rorschach reads, and it's like it looks like a Ben Garrison cartoon. It's just like all like over the top, like there's like a mafioso, and there's like this like like a racist depiction of a black lady like selling reefer, and like it's so wonderful.
Yeah, I love how he like over explains things with labels too. Like, it's like, okay, I think you could have explained this just through the drawing, but it's like here and here. Like, it's just so over the top with it. I love it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and no, he's great, and he's kind of like he doesn't seem self-aware, which is like kind of what's funny about it. Like he could. I don't know. I mean, I think in a way he's like consciously pandering to the alt-right, and that's where he's found his like basically his only success as an artist. So I think he's kind of authentic in the sense that he's not. He's kind of like a grifter, just like all these guys who have like attached themselves to Trump, like Mike Cernovich and whatever. And
Hmm.
they're just sort of guys who would never succeed professionally until they were like selling MAGA chuds, like books about how your guerrilla mindset will help you in the bedroom or something. Like he's just one of those guys. Like I think that he like the line is like Trump really, and like the line between whether they believe it or whether they're grifting is just sort of non-existent because it's just all part of the same. It's all part of the same thing. Like he's just a dumb guy. He doesn't have anything interesting to say. Bad
Hmm.
thinker, bad at politics, but has found success with this crowd, and like that's affirming to him. Like he just, you couldn't convince him otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it kind of reminds me of, it's not an editorial cartoonist, but the painter, is it Jim McNaughton, that guy that draw yeah.
Yeah,
There's he has a very busy canvas as well. Like there's always a lot going on in in his work. It's like there's an eagle crying and Obama stepping on the Constitution and George Washington's like head in his hands. It's like this is actually technically like you're doing some interesting things here, but it's like I can't imagine just spending so much time on something so insane. So,
oh yeah, no, it's god awful. I mean the art that would exist under fascism. I mean this is a glimpse of like
right.
you know what would happen if more people were into this and they were able to like I I I, I don't know that they're going to win the next election, but it's if they somehow were able to and they were able to like culturally succeed or something, this is the type of stuff they want to produce. Like this is the type of stuff they want to hail and celebrate, and this is what they will fund under the fascist overlord Trump and my dystopia. It's like there's just an art gallery with John McNaughton and Ben Garrison cartoons.
You mentioned the cartoons, the animated cartoons. I really enjoyed those. Is there any plans to bring those back sometime in the future?
No plans because animation is quite expensive. That was definitely one of the things that was, done under the auspices of working for a new media company that was willing to fund it.
Hmm.
Um, what the deal with those was we we kind of we had a ton of control over it, and we were just kind of allowed to do just about whatever we wanted. And so we wrote and storyboarded all these things, and Augenblick Studios, a really good animation studio in New York, made them move and made them talk. And it was the nib, but it was for this thing called Topic, which is a website that First Look also funds, and
Mm.
they produce a lot of video and mostly not animated. But um, the idea was that this could maybe be a web series, or it could be sold to a streaming company. We kind of tried a bunch of different things. I mean, they were really just produced to grow audience for Topic
Mm.
ultimately, and we tried to approach some streaming services with doing something like a different version of it or a longer version of it or whatever, and it just didn't happen. And so that was like, I mean, it was fun to do, and I wish the a bigger deal had happened because it was, had with the streaming services, you have the potential to actually make a lot of money, and it could have underwritten the nib. But as fun as animation is, I mean, I like comics and want to do comics, and they're
Hmm.
also easier to produce than animation, which is just an extraordinarily time-consuming thing that involves multiple people with multiple skill sets. And you know, I don't know that I'm gonna. I mean, I don't want to say never because it was like super fun to do, but it's hard to sell stuff like that.
Hmm.
Even something successful like Tuca and Birdie was just canceled by Netflix, and that's
Hmm.
not political cartoons, obviously, but like it's just a lot. It's a lot harder to get stuff like that made.
Hmm. Creatively, though, it seems like there is somewhat of a tension between people that are primarily just cartoonists and then their work gets taken to the animated realm. Did you ever see? I used to read The Far Side all the time. Did you ever see those cartoons, those animated cartoons they made of The Far Side?
No, how? I mean, I don't even.
They're
What?
like I'll send you a link to them, but they were like in the 90s, and they were like, I think it was some French. There was no dialogue in any of them, but it was like animated like vignettes of like Far Side cartoons. I thought that was really cool. And then I know that I used to read Calvin and Hobbes all the time too, and I know that he famously never wanted to license it for anything. But then, of course, Calvin was like peeing on a thousand at back of thousands of
Yeah.
trucks anyway. But yeah, I don't know. And you know, with Tom Tomorrow, you mentioned him. We mentioned him before, and he had a animation thing back. I think it was in the 90s as well, or maybe it was in the 2000s. But I like it. As a consumer of it, I think it's fun when something I like gets translated like that. But I understand if you're like a creator, you know, if you don't have total control, or if you like it in one medium, or you know, it's just a lot of work. It seems like it can go awry or not be what you'd want it to be, possibly. But
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's fun. If a deal happened with the nib animation thing again, I mean, I would do it. It was so fun to work more collaboratively with a
mhm.
bunch of cartoonists. Like I would write stuff and then, have someone else draw the thing, or me and Matt Luchansky often would write a script and one of us would draw it, or someone else would draw it entirely. There's a reason why a lot of people get into movies and animation and don't stick with comics necessarily, because there's not a lot of money in comics. I mean, it's extremely hard to make a living as a full-time cartoonist. Um,
Mhm.
so, I mean, someone like Lisa Hannawalt, she came up because of Tuca and Birdie, and she worked on BoJack Horseman. I mean, she still does some comics, and they're great. But like her primary income source is clearly like, has been Netflix shows. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
when you're presented with that opportunity, you take it because that's your ticket to like make a decent living. And so I think on the one hand, I fully support artists going and doing animation with their projects or movies with their projects. um, I would want to do it too in order to facilitate myself doing more comics. Like,
Mm.
you know, I'm I would be I would want to be like Alan Moore. Just not that I wouldn't care about how they come out, but just like it would just be it's just about money, getting money so that I could like do my own project.
Mhm.
So
Right.
yeah, I'm not like opposed to, and I mean, animation and movies are great, but with all the, I'd much rather read comics, honestly, and do comics myself. So,
Mhm.
I love what I do, but I don't even have a lot of time to do comics myself. I mean, it may look that way if you're reading like a comic I do a week, but that represents like one night of cartooning. Like, I have no ability to put out like a graphic novel, which is something that I'd love to do. So like if I could do some sort of movie deal and get enough money to like take a year off to draw a book, I mean that's why I'd want to do that, not really for the end product of something being a movie.
Right. Definitely. What would you say to younger people who are wanting to do editorial cartooning? Obviously, the media landscape is what it is, but you know, if somebody has that's their passion, what would you tell them?
Well, pitch me. I mean, I feel like one of the reasons I created the nib is to make a permanent space for some of this stuff, and a publication that's devoted to it entirely, as opposed to publications that barely make any space whatsoever for any kind of comics. Um, yeah, advice now is it's even harder than when I was coming up, which was at the very, very tail end of like all weeklies existing. And I think I still run in one, but that was no longer a viable path. And unfortunately, a lot of websites don't run this stuff. Like it just wasn't part of their formulation and it never became a normal thing. So
Mm.
unfortunately, I don't really see anyone doing it full time anymore. I mean, I run a younger crowd of cartoonists like Chelsea Saunders, Niccolo Pizarro, Kendra Wells, people in their 20s who like do some political cartoons, but I'm not sure if they weren't doing it for me if they'd be doing it anywhere, because there's not really a lot of places giving them that opportunity. So I mean, I would just say, unfortunately, you probably just got to publish work and get it out there and try to build up a following. And then from there, you got to try to leverage that into, getting someone to pay you to do it, which is a publication. And I think you gotta, there's a lot of publications out there that aren't running political comics and should, and so there's an opportunity to convince them to do it. Not saying that that's easy, but there's really even a dearth of people doing this at all anymore. So there's not a lot of people to choose from. So I mean, it's like if you can find the right editor that's willing to give you a shot, that's what you got to do. Unfortunately, I think that's a lot harder than it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, on that happy note, I always ask people before we go, what music have you been listening to lately?
What music have I been listening to lately? Man, all kinds of stuff. There's this woman, Marika Hackman, who's like, I don't know how you describe her, singer-songwriter, rock artist or something. She's really great. I just saw her live. Her new album is really good. Her last album was really good. I love her. I've been listening to a lot of jazz too. This guy, Micaiah McCraven, is really great. Those are two things that I've been listening to.
So not the new Kanye gospel album?
I listened to it. I was big on Kanye all the way through.
Me too.
Jesus, I thought was great. I mean, I was hard into Kanye for a long time. The last album was just absolutely atrocious. I hate it. And the new one, it has flashes of stuff that is like pretty interesting and sounds cool, but I mean, Kanye sucks now, unfortunately. I mean, he definitely sucks like politically, and he's always been like obnoxious and egocentric, but like in the last few years, he's just like on another level. You can barely stand him at all, and aligning with Trump was just like despicable. This album, I mean, I can divorce myself from that to like listen to music, but I'm not super into it, no.
Okay. I've been too scared because I was in the same boat. I used to love Kanye, and I don't know. I can't tell if I just have soured on him artistically or personally, or maybe it's just a mix of both. But it's a hard pill to take. But
yeah, well, I find the whole there's like a song with Clips and Kenny G on it, which I think is actually it's a good song, and the whole gospel conceit is the music itself is not necessarily bad, but it's hard to swallow for me, because it's like he's just sort of stumbled across, yet another idea that he's like thrown himself into fully, and like turned into some like egocentric thing now, where he's like, he's close with God. He said something about God gave him he thanks God for his tax cut, and it's just like, he's not really religious. He's just, his religion is
what?
Himself. So the whole thing's a bit contrived.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Well, hey, I've taken up a lot of your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk, and I'll be looking out for whatever you do. People should definitely support the Nib. I enjoy it greatly. I always share stuff when I see it come across any social media I follow. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, man.
Cool. Well, have a good rest of your day.
All right. You too. Later.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Join the Rob Burgess Show mailing list. Go to tinyletter.com/The Rob Burgess Show and type in your email address. Then respond to the automatic message. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review everywhere the podcast is available, including iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, RSS, and now Spotify. The official website for the podcast is www.therobburgessshow.com. You can find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com. If you have something to say, record a voice memo on your smartphone and send it to therobburgessshow@gmail.com. Include voice memo in the subject line of the email. Also, if you want to call or text the show for any reason, the number is 317-674-3547. Until next time.